Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. In today's video, I want to share with you how you can use water-soluble graphite in your creative projects. Water-soluble graphite is different than watercolor pencils, and so I will share with you some of the things that I've learned from them and how I've been using them in my projects. So I started playing around with water-soluble graphite probably about a month ago. I was in the art store. I was talking about the different things I wanted to try to use for drawing and for adding water to them. And the art store suggested these particular graphite pencils to me. These are the Caran Technalo water-soluble graphite pencils. And so they're a little bit different than a colored pencil because they are graphite, but they do come in 3 shades of graphite. We have this Carmine Lake, we have this green color, as well as a blue. And this Carmine Lake has a little bit more of a brown red tone to it. Again, green's a little bit more green and blue's a little bit more blue. Plus you have the pure black. And what's really cool about these is they still give you that very graphite look, but they do provide some really fun surprises as you add water to them. So now I've added a little bit of graphite to my Bristol paper in both the black Prussian blue, phthalocyanine green, and Carmine Lake. What you'll notice about all of these is they all have that graphite color. They all have a little bit of variation between each swatch, but it pretty much just looks like pencil. On the watercolor, I've already done the black, but you'll notice it doesn't go on quite as smoothly as with the Bristol, and that's to be expected, though the watercolor paper will take more water. And so I'm just going to be just adding a little bit of the blue here, the green here, and you can see like it basically just goes on like regular graphite. And that's the point, because they are a graphite pencil, even if they do have some color in it. I'm going to be using my size 10 whole beam watercolor brush. And now I'm going to swatch down this. And you can see what amazing blend of color you can get. And so I wanted to leave a little bit of the graphite so you can just see how far this can blend. And then here's the Prussian blue. And so you go from just a regular graphite to this really amazing mix of color. And this is, for me, when it comes to mixed media, when it comes to adding drawing and other mediums together and maybe using a little bit of pencil and just adding water like this, this gives you so many options for where I could go with this. And again, they're not meant to be pure bright colors. They're still graphite. They're still going to have that graphite undertone to them. But being able to have something that you could basically add graphite and then add water to it goes a long way. And so that's with watercolor, and I'm going to show you a little bit on the Bristol. And I haven't actually tried this on Bristol before, so you're going to still get the same movement. It's not going to work quite as well as on watercolor paper just because it is a smoother surface, but you can still see you still get a great blend. If you're looking for paper that's very smooth and great for drawing on, but you want to be able to add this, the Bristol is strong enough to be able to hold both the water and the pencil, and so it'll give you that really smooth gradated finish. You can see it resists the water a little bit more. You're going to have to work a little bit harder with it, which is why I generally prefer to use watercolor with these types of pencils, but at the same time, there's nothing saying that you can't use just Bristol paper as well. When you are working on watercolor paper, you're going to have a little bit more of that roughness of the paper showing through, but overall, it's not that different, and they both have really nice effects. So I really wanted to show you what you could do with just a basic pencil sketch and how you could add these graphites into this pencil sketch. This is not the only way you can use them. I would usually use pencils like this on top of paint, on top of watercolor, and other mixed media. But I wanted to show you just more of a pure way of doing this today, just so you can start understanding how to blend these colors and how to blend them all together where they give you the look that you want. And so the hard thing with this sometimes when you first start out is realizing that because the graphite is similar colors, when you add it to your surface, it's going to look like graphite. So you're going to have to kind of try to keep track of what colors are where. In this case, I'm just adding a few spots here. I'm not going super precious with this. I'm not going super crazy making sure it's all perfect. And you'll see why in a little bit. Just want to get a little bit of the dark areas in here. And the most important thing about this is making sure you don't add too much to the surface. And this Carmine Lake color has a little bit of red brown that I love adding onto my rabbit pictures. So I'm just adding a little bit along the edge here. along the top. And this might not seem like a lot, but you will see as we go on why I'm only adding little bits and pieces in places. And some of this has been from experience of trying to use these, coloring in the entire object and then realizing that was just way too much. And because I am using Bristol for this particular picture, if I was using watercolor, I would go for a much larger brush, but because I am using Bristol, I'm gonna go with a brush that holds a little less water. So you can see that just as I'm blending that, it picks up the color, it blends it out, and this is where you can start really blending it nicely. This works a little bit better on watercolor paper. This is actually the first time I've tried this on Bristol, and I think I prefer watercolor paper a little bit more for this step. You can see in those dark areas, now I have my shadow in there, and that's working really well. And I'm just going to pull that color in. So this is a way where if you like a particular color that you've added in, if you want it really, really light, you can pull colors in other areas. And I like these pencils because they're a great way of working on your value skills. I struggle a lot with getting good lights and darks in my pieces, so something like this is a really good option for me because it allows me to get these really dark spots. But because I'm a little bit more comfortable with a brush than I am with a pencil, it allows me to kind of work on both sets of skills. Bottom of that ear is going to be just a bit more stronger in color. So you can just kind of keep going with this. So I'm off to the side here, I do have a reference picture, so I'm adding in some black and some of the places where her body has those areas. Again, this is meant to be kind of loose, and this isn't as loose as I would love to go with this, but I'm still figuring out how I want to do this and how to use these pencils. But for now, this works. This kind of gives you the spot that I want to go. Now this one I'm moving up to my size 10 brush. I think this will be a lot easier being a larger area. You have to be careful with the pencil lines because they do show up, so you want to make sure that you're being a little bit more careful with how you're adding them to your project. And this is where if you want to be really specific and have a spot that has a really strong line, you can actually just take the graphite itself and add it onto those wet spots. You just need to be very careful because it's going to give you very strong, very specific lines, and they don't go away once you add them wet on wet. But it is something you can do if you want to have areas that are super dark, like what I'm doing here. You can see it'll move a little bit, but most of it just stays in place because you've already wetted it. It's not going to move much. And then at some point, if you feel like you've gone too far, it looks a little too much all the same, you can always dab up a bit, and you can see that it will pull up a lot of it, but it's not going to remove all of the color because there's still graphite on that surface, and that isn't really going to go away. One important thing to realize when you are working with animals and doing this type of work, make sure that you are going in the direction of the hair. With your strokes, with your pencil marks, it does make a difference on the overall look of the piece. Because this bunny, she has a fairly distinct coat in the sense of she has a lot of varied pattern in her fur. So she'll have some dark spots and she'll have some light spots. So she ends up generally looking kind of the same color, but there are some spots that are very specifically a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. And that's what I was trying to do with this particular picture, is to try to show those lighter and darker spots. It's easier with a rabbit that has a little bit more pattern. She's more of a one shade bunny. You can see that this does work a little bit differently than watercolor. It's not the same technique for getting color down. Because all her hair is moving in this direction, I'm going to add in my color in the same direction. So a lot of it is figuring out how much graphite to add, how to control it, and how much brush movement you want. So it's a little bit different. It's really that combination of using both graphite and brushwork together, but in a different way than you would usually do watercolor. And rabbit feet I always find a little bit hard. They're kind of nondescript because basically you have tons and tons of fur and it can be sometimes hard just to draw them. This is a bit of a strange picture and a strange angle. Her back legs were not holding her up very well, so she was sitting on the back end and standing on the front end, which makes for a little bit of a funny look to this, but that's okay. I'm just going to add another layer on this, and I'm going to add the shadows around her. And this I'm using the Prussian blue color. And the shadows are mostly on this side and to the front a little bit. And that's right, if you accidentally grab some of the wet from things, you can get those strong streaks of blue color. And I'm not done. I'll be adding some more layers onto the rest of her, but I thought I would just take this minute to talk a little bit about why I am doing this particular layout today and why this is going in my art journal. This little girl, she passed away 2 days ago. And so as part of my way of dealing with grief, I often art journal. Art journaling for me is a place for me to just really be able to dig into sadness, dig into some feelings that I'm having, and be able to really embrace what's happened. And I'll be honest, I'm still really sad. I'm still having a really hard time with it. She was 8 years and 11 months old. She was almost at her 9th birthday, and that for me was really hard because she'd hung in there for so long. I know the litter she came from, she's one of the last remaining ones. I actually have the 2 last remaining rabbits of that particular litter, so I know I did take good care of them, but that doesn't make it any easier when they're no longer with you and you're having to make decisions about their final days. And it's been hard. It's been really challenging and really difficult. And I spent a lot of time talking with my vet about what the best thing to do was. I find that the process of art journaling, it works me through those stages of grief. So instead of feeling so incredibly overwhelmed by it, I can start feeling more at peace about what has happened. And it just really helps me through that process and through finding my way through the difficulty and the challenges that this time's going to bring. I did a few drawings like this with these pencils before she passed away, and then I've done a few after. And this for me has just been a really important way of being able to talk about her life and talk about the feelings I have and being able to find a way to deal with them in a really healthy way. And I was going to keep this background a little bit lighter, but now I've decided I was just going to darken it up a little bit more. You can actually also take your brush and just pull a lot of really intense color straight off of the pencil. And so that's another way that you can just add in a bit of the color to your page. This is at an angle and the picture's at an angle, but I think I'm straightening out that angle. It just looks a little weird and I don't want the picture looking wonky. And this is where sometimes you need to take that creative license when you are painting and drawing, just to find what ends up working the best for your picture. I always struggled a little bit with horizon lines, so we'll see how this goes. This is more just about getting some color down and trying to keep those shadows in place a little bit. So shadows are really quite a bit darker between her legs, around this paw, about there. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit. I do have those weird marks over here. I'm just going to try to remove some of them. If you're going to want to add more marks in, unless you want really strong marks, use the pencil and just grab some water and add some water on top over going the other way. You can see it does make a little bit of a mess of your pencil, and when that happens, just take a paper towel and just give it a little bit of a wipe, and that will help clean it up a little bit. So I've taken a heat tool to this to make sure this is fully dry. You don't want to really move on to adding other layers until you have the surface dry, because it'll prevent it from pilling or ending up ruining your paper. I like it so far, but it's a little too gray. I want to add a little bit more brown in. So I'm going to go in and add strokes. And what you're going to notice is that it goes on like graphite. You don't see the color very much. And so what I'm doing is just adding into some places. I'll bring my brush over top. Now you just have to remember where you've put it. That's always sometimes the hard part. And if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, if you could please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support means so much, and I'm always coming up with new things and experimenting with different art products. So I do hope that this video just gives you an idea of a place you could start with this. And again, if you have too much water there, you have a couple options. You can also dab off on a piece of paper and then just pull a little bit of that color off. or even just to lighten it. And that way it works very similarly to watercolor, where you can adjust the color by just pulling and adjusting and pulling and adjusting to get the colors that you want. And this will always be less vibrant than using colored pencils. The graphite is meant to have more of that graphite look. What I love about these is you have an option of getting those more fun toned graphite pencils. And what I've been really using this for is working on my value skills. I struggle with getting good values. You can see here, even I've gotten fairly dark with the background. All of a sudden going, okay, well my bunny is really light, but that isn't really as close as I want it to be. And so I'm trying to keep the ears not too dark. And so I've been playing a little bit back and forth. And these are fairly forgiving for playing back and forth like I'm doing, where you can add some color, remove it, dab it on, dab it off, see what works and see what technique you like. Along her cheek here, she used to have jowls that were a little bit darker along the edges. Funny little, almost like a square in there, where she had this really dark spot up here, and then it almost fell onto her face and some brindle here and there. And so that's what made her such an interesting looking bunny, is she had little white mouth, and she had a lot of really soft, gentle brown spots, but then she also had these super dark ones. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to try to do a more general drawing of her, but I'm enjoying the process. And they also have a lot of tiny whiskers that often aren't all that well seen. And in this case, hers are much shorter than a normal rabbit's because her sister kept biting them off on her. They would just nibble each other's whiskers all the time, and so they never really had a full set. So I'm gonna give her a little bit more full set than I think she really had in life. But now I've added that with a little bit of the black, and you can take a really fine graphite pencil and just add in those very little whiskers. And they're fine as they are, but I wanted to make them a little bit brighter. So by going in with just the tiniest bit of water, just to wet that graphite, that just gives you that little bit of that final look that you want with the graphite. And I'm not quite done yet, because one thing I have started doing is on paintings like this is adding a little bit of tinted charcoal. I often use tinted charcoal in one of my books that has gray paper in it, because in that way you can often get your highlights in a little bit easier. And so when you're adding the tinted charcoal, I'm just going to go over areas that I really want the ears to have all their little white hairs. And I know it is pulling a little bit of that color over, but I don't mind. I want to have that idea of the more pure white, but also have the idea that the hair is moving on her body. And all of the inside of their ears have all this really fine, soft hair. And then this fringe here, and then around her eyes. She had almost eyeliner around her eyes. It was the nature of her eyes. So it was a little bit lighter in there. She had this little spot underneath that also had some lighter color. She had a bit of lighter color just along her shoulder here. And then of course her little mouth. She always had these little white mustaches, which made them super cute. Then last of all, I'm just going to add in a little bit around the feet. This will also give that sense of like there are toes there. There is stuff going on, you just can't see it super, super well. Gonna add in just a tiny bit more black in there. I want that to be very, very bold. There's just a speck of white in there at the corner of her eye. And even if there's no catch light, I always put a little catch light in their eye. I feel like that gives them that sense of life that I really want in this picture. And so you can see that this is a work in progress. I'm still learning how to use these pencils, but I like that you can add layers to them, that you can add charcoal and other things with it. And as well, you have these beautiful blue color along with the black and the more sienna lake color. And I also wanted to show you a couple more examples where I was playing with this week. So this is the actual journaling page that I did in my journal for Flopsy, where I shared some of the journaling about my experiences with her, some things I wanted to remember, and just a painting of her. And this one I did with the green in the background, as well as the more red brown and the black. And I also have one more that I did in a similar vein, and this one's Flopsy and her sister Priscilla, and you can see that I managed to use most of the colors together. I have actually the black here. I only use mostly brown except for the black for the eyes, and the blue worked really well for Priscilla, who's a bit of a darker bunny. So you can see that it doesn't take a lot of color to kind of get you that sense of values. I really like the look of this pencil and this graphite. It's a very different look than most of the other color pencils and other things that you can do. And you could also make the choice not to do something nearly this dramatic. You could do something like this and then add water to it and just let it drip down your page. Or you could take a very simple shape like a circle and just define that circle more. There's so many different ways you can use this. I've just shown you one example of just how I am using this color to be able to come up with a different way that I want to use these in my creative practice. And I will probably use it more in areas like this where maybe I put down some color, I blend it out a little bit, I add in some more spots. It overlaps so you get the wet on there, and maybe that ends up being my background, and maybe that's enough, right? There's more than one way you can use this. You can use this very light. You can use it a lot more photorealistically, like I did here, and this was for a particular purpose, but I also like going crazy with stuff like this, and this is how I would usually use it in my creative journals. But it's fun to play around and to see how far things can take you. So, and if you've enjoyed this video, if you could like it, subscribe, and just hit that notification button so you don't miss on any future videos. And I really hope that you've learned something today. And if you have, if you could just leave a comment below, I would love to start a conversation with you and just help understand what you're looking for in your creative practice and maybe what you're discovering using some of these different art products. If you're interested in seeing how watercolor pens can be used in a project, click here. This is a video where I go into a lot of the techniques that you can use with watercolor pens. I hope you have a really great week, that you take some time for some personal self-care, and I will see you next time.